Hey there, it's Lara here. So, welcome to your weekly astrology forecast. This one is for June 16th to the 22nd, 2021. Thanks for being here. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you stopped by. I hope you stick around. And if you don't know what's going on around here yet, these forecasts go Wednesday to Wednesday, and I talk about the most sort of potent astrological events that are happening and how they're impacting us collectively, but also very personally as well. And I'm about to launch a brand new website. I had a website for quite a long time, but I'm in the process of launching a brand new one, and it's taking so much time. Saturn square Uranus. Well, we're going to talk about that today. And anyway, it's getting there. It's getting really close. So if you want to get on the list to find out when the new site launches, and if you want to get my free guide to working with the moon, then please head over to astrologymaven.com, and I'll put the link below, and you can do that there. Okay, so let's get on with it. Speaking of the moon, we've got the moon in Virgo today, and she will move off into Libra on Friday over Friday, Saturday. And then in the early morning of Sunday, the 20th, which is the solstice, the moon will move into Scorpio. And we're going to talk about the significance of that specifically a little bit later on in the video. And that just so happens to be the same day that Jupiter stations retrograde in Pisces, which we'll also cover. So the 20th is there's a lot going on the 20th. It's a bit of a it's one to watch, let's just put it that way. And then the moon will move off into Sagittarius on Tuesday morning. So that's where the moon is at. And then we've also got, as I mentioned, the solstice, where the sun enters Cancer. And Jupiter retrograde, stations retrograde in Pisces on the 20th at 2 degrees Pisces. And then on Tuesday, the 22nd, Mercury stations direct at 16 degrees of Gemini. So Mercury has been went retrograde on May 23rd and at around between 24 and 25 degrees of Gemini. And it will station direct on Tuesday the 22nd at 16 Gemini, and then it will start moving forward through those same degrees that it's passed over twice already. So it will make that third and final pass, and it will leave that zone around July 8th or 9th. And, we will start to get more clarity in terms of what that Mercury retrograde was really wanting us to focus on. And things will start, in terms of the Mercury energy, we'll start to gain some momentum there, right? And Mercury is our thinking, our communications, our the mind, the moving parts, that sort of thing. So that's the overall picture, and we're going to break it down into smaller bits. But in general, what I want to say is that we are kind of, the general theme is we're really being kind of pulled in all directions over the next month or so, until mid-July anyway. But we've got, and I'm going to talk to you about why that is. It has a lot to do with Saturn and Uranus, but it also has to do with Mars, and a couple other things I'm gonna get into. But we have Jupiter in Pisces, right? The sign of its feminine home. And we've talked about Jupiter and Pisces and the significance of that in a past video, and I'll put the link to that below in case you haven't seen it yet, because it will be relevant for a while. Jupiter is going to is retrograding now, will tip back into Aquarius in July, later in July, and then it will travel back through Aquarius for a little bit, finish some unfinished business there, and then will move forward again, and head back into Pisces at the end of 2021, where it will stay for until, I can't remember the exact date, but I believe it's May. And then it does a bit of a dance. So this Jupiter in Pisces period it's a bit of a beacon for us. It's a bit of I think I used the phrase last week, it's kind of like this glimmer of hope in the distance of like what's to come, of the good things on the horizon, and that we may be getting just a little bit of a taste of now, right? So let me just circle back a little bit and talk about the solstice. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Jupiter's station retrograde, but I want to talk to you about the solstice. So we have two solstices a year, right? We have the summer solstice, which in the northern hemisphere happens in June. And we have the winter solstice, which happens in December in the northern hemisphere. And you can reverse those. So in the southern hemisphere, the winter solstice, right, is June, and summer solstice is December. But what happens at the solstice is the sun appears to stop in the sky and change direction. Almost like a retrograde, if you will. But that happens at 2 points in the year, and it marks the longest day. And when I'm talking about the summer solstice here, it marks the longest day of the year, right? Where we have the longest number of daylight hours. And from that point forward in the northern hemisphere, ever so slowly, the days will start to get shorter and shorter. And they will grow in the south. Solstice actually means sun stop or sun stationary. And so that's where we get that. It's quite literal. The translation is pretty literal. And it happens, summer solstice in the northern hemisphere happens when in late June, when the sun hits the Tropic of Cancer. And then the winter solstice happens in late December when the sun hits the Tropic of Capricorn, right? Which is, it's no surprise. Cancer season is when we have the summer solstice in the north. Capricorn season is when we have the winter solstice in the north. And the tropical zodiac is it's based in the northern hemisphere, right? So we have that going on. And the moment is when the sun enters the sign of Cancer. We sometimes say that, astrologically speaking, it's when it hits the midpoint of 15 degrees, but it's generally when the sun tips into the sign of Cancer. So it hits 0 degrees of Cancer. That marks the summer solstice in the north. And that's happening on June 20th. So the sun, right, our life force, our motivation, I used the phrase last week, the central organizing principle, borrowed from Demetra George. It was Demetra George I heard use that phrase on the astrology podcast. And I love that notion, right? Because if we take that personal, into our personal life experience, the sun is the central organizing principle. It's what everything else in our lives sort of revolves around. It's our motivation. It's the highest sort of ideal of something, right? And so the sun, when the sun moves into Cancer now, that is where our sort of motivation, collectively speaking, flows. So it shines a light on the Cancerian themes of home and family and nurturing and safety and security, tribe, those kinds of things. And so it is a time when in the Northern Hemisphere, where I'm from here, we don't get a whole lot of, we spend a lot of time in the colder months. And so when summer hits and the warm weather's nice, it is a time when people really gather with their friends and family, and there is a focus on sort of familial connections, and even things that help us feel nurtured, right? So that's the sun moving into Cancer and marking the solstice. And then, like I said, on that same day, we also have Jupiter stationing retrograde in Pisces. So Jupiter stations retrograde every year, about every 13 months for roughly 4 months at a time. And so, like many of the larger planets, or the slower moving planets, the retrogrades are a pretty normal occurrence. But it doesn't mean that they're not significant. And what makes them more significant is, how they are placed at that particular time of the retrograde. And this year, Jupiter is in its home sign of Pisces, stationing retrograde at 2 degrees, and it will station direct on October 18th at 22 Aquarius. So it'll move back into Aquarius, like I said, station direct October 18th, and then start moving forward again. But generally, Jupiter retrograde is, like any planet when it retrogrades, is like it's sort of an internalizing in many ways of the energy of whatever that planet represents. It is also it has the potential to bring about sort of reversals in regards to whatever's going on, whatever the themes of that planet are as well. And so with Jupiter retrograde, it's a real time of introspection, right? It's a time to develop. One of the things that Jupiter represents is wisdom. And so it's a time to focus on inner wisdom. It's a time of like philosophical growth, right? Jupiter is the philosopher. And it's a time to get acquainted with and maybe reevaluate your relationship with Jupiter in your life, right? And what is your connection to Jupiter? So like if you've been overdoing it, for example, because Jupiter is the planet of expansion, Jupiter grows whatever it touches, right? So generally Jupiter is thought to be very benefic. It's a benefic planet. It brings good things, good fortune, positive things, joy, optimism. But the caveat is there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, right? So the growth can go unchecked, and then that is problematic. So if we've been overdoing it in some way, over the top in some way, particularly, in relation like Jupiter, to where Jupiter is placed in our chart in terms of Pisces, right? Whatever the house Pisces sits for you, is where Jupiter has just dipped its toes in the water of Pisces there. But if you're noticing a tendency to go overboard in that area, then it's a time as Jupiter retrogrades where you can check yourself a little bit, right? And you can maybe come to terms with whatever it is that you've been, like if you've been, I don't know, if you've been overspending, if you've been overindulging, with food or alcohol or whatever, if you've been overindulging your own ego, or I mean, it could be so many things, right? Then it's a time when Jupiter stations and Jupiter turns retrograde to reevaluate that, your relationship to Jupiterian qualities. And conversely, if you have been, denying yourself those things, or if your life circumstances have been such that you have been, denied those Jupiterian things, happiness, joy, success, pleasure, growth, abundance, all those things, then it can be a time when the tables turn. And, you can intentionally contemplate how you can have a better relationship with those things and bring more positive Jupiterian qualities in. Or sometimes, it's just life happens, and that happens anyway. Not necessarily because of something we did. So that's what's going on with Jupiter. And I'll put the link to the Jupiter and Pisces video below, again, in case you missed that. And then we also have, well, let me just say one more thing. Let me just say one more thing before I move to the next piece. I think it's important to take note. Take note of Jupiter. Give Jupiter a little love and attention. Think about that, reflect on it, notice, however subtle, notice the improvements that have come into your life as a result of Jupiter moving into Pisces, right? And those improvements may be most notable in the Pisces era of your chart, but it's possible that it's affecting other areas too, depending on your chart. But take note of that. And that's like I was saying earlier, it's kind of like the beacon. It's like I see this as when we're being pulled in all directions by what's going on with Saturn and Uranus and Mars, to kind of like use that Jupiter in Pisces, even though Jupiter is stationing retrograde, to kind of like remind yourself that this too shall pass. It's kind of like, it's the life raft, right? Pisces is a water sign. Jupiter in Pisces, it's like the inflatable life raft that we need, in rough waters, or if we're thrown overboard or what have you. It's I think that's the best analogy because it is a water sign, but you could think of it, if it makes more sense to you, you could think of it as a bit of a lighthouse or a ground wire, that Jupiter in Pisces that kind of brings you back to center, and that allows you a little bit of ease when, whether it's peace of mind, whether it's ease of experience, whether it is just the knowing like that things can improve, right? Focus on that Jupiter and Pisces piece in the chaos that is ensuing right now, and will carry on for the remainder of the year in some way, shape, or form to varying degrees. So, and we're going to talk about that, but just one more thing before I get there. Neptune's also stationing next week. So Neptune's also in Pisces, right? And in modern astrological thinking, Neptune rules Pisces. Traditionally, Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces, which is how I tend to think of it. I didn't always, but I do now. And I see Neptune has an affiliation with Pisces for certain, but Jupiter is the ruler. And so Neptune in Pisces it's there for a long time. Neptune's a slow moving planet, but there's something significant about these two planets both in Pisces at the same time. And Neptune retrograde, it's one of those things that happens every year as well for about 5 months at a time. Neptune's retrograde for about 40% of the time in total. And this Neptune retrograde begins on June 25th at 23 Pisces. So really next week, right? And ends on December, I didn't write the date down, but it ends in December at 20 degrees Pisces. So just a few degrees, it's traveling there. But it's kind of like, I see it as further emphasizing that introspection piece, particularly regarding the Pisces house in our chart and the potential for reversals there, right? So that Pisces area of life is where we can, just to reiterate, where we can look for some soothing, some medicine, some soul balm, a bit of quenching, right? Even when other things might seem like they're on fire. And so let's get there. Let's get to that piece. What we're going to focus on for the most part here is the fact that Saturn and Uranus have come into the second of 3 exact squares that they are engaging in over the course of 2021. The first was in February. The second was actually on the 14th. So just a couple of days ago, it went exact, but we're still in the thick of it. And we will be for quite a while. And it will happen again in December of this year. So, but the difference here is that Mars, right? Which I spoke about last week. Mars in Leo, Mars moving out of Cancer is not a bad thing because Mars does not like being in Cancer. Mars prefers to be in Leo. But the downside, I don't really want to say the downside because it doesn't necessarily have to be, but the thing to take note of here is that when Mars moves through Leo, Leo's a fixed sign, right? Saturn is in Aquarius, a fixed sign. Uranus is in Taurus, a fixed sign. So Mars is moving into Leo, a fixed sign, which is going to trigger that square. It's going to inflame it even more. And so Mars is in Leo until July 29th. And so it's going to make this T-square to Saturn and Uranus. Saturn in Aquarius, Uranus in Taurus. And further to that, when the moon moves through Scorpio, as it does every month for a couple of days, it will further amplify that, right? Because then we'll have this kind of like literally think of it like being pulled in all 4 directions. It is the fixed cross in the sky where all this, Saturn, Uranus, Mars, and the moon will be kind of yanking back and forth. So the first pass of the moon through Scorpio is happening June 20th, right? Solstice, Jupiter stationing retrograde, the sun moving into Cancer, and the moon entering Scorpio, triggering that square. And so that's happening June 20th and 21st. The moon will be in Scorpio. And then again in July, before Mars moves out of Leo, the moon will move through Scorpio again, July 18th and 19th. So we'll have one more kind of like, ping there. And even by mid-July, Saturn and Uranus are still only 3 or 4 degrees away from an exact square. So that's still pretty tight, right? We've talked in past videos about how this square waxes and wanes, and we reach like the 3 pressure points in the year, the 3 high pitch points, and one of those is happening right now, right? Like it was exact on the 14th, but it's it's still very, very close. And again, with Mars being in Leo, and then, the moon as well on a couple of occasions, further triggering that. So, and then just to add more fuel to the fire, at the end of June, right, Mars will enter like within closer range of that square degree in terms of degrees, just as Venus also moves into Leo. So, oh my gosh. So, on July 1st, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, like we're not just focusing on this week, but this is important to know because I am going to take you through, in a bit here to refresh your memory, where is Saturn and Uranus in your chart, but then also like what's happening with Mars, and then to a lesser degree the moon, right? Because this is a real, it's the second of the three. It's the of the three exact squares. It's like the the climax of the story sort of thing. And so it's important to take note of. So July 1st, Mars will oppose Saturn at 12 degrees. Saturn in Aquarius, Mars in Leo. And a few days later, on July 3rd, it will square Uranus. So Mars in Leo will square Uranus in Taurus. And then July 6th through the 8th, Venus does the same, right? So triggering that square again. The last time that Mars triggered the Saturn-Uranus square, which was Mars conjunct Uranus, was when there was the insurrection on the Capitol in Washington, D.C. So who knows, right? Who knows what's going to happen? But I mean, we're seeing constant flare-ups of various issues in the news cycle. So it's really not that surprising. Actually, it's funny. A friend of mine was commenting, Lisa, hi, if you're listening to this. I know you generally do. So just about the fact that nothing surprises her anymore, and I commented that. Like that, I think that is the, I can't remember exactly what I said, but that's like really the best coping strategy, I think, right now, is just like not being surprised by anything. Just kind of expecting, things to change and shift and shocking things to happen. And when we expect it, it's kind of like, it softens the blow a little bit, maybe. So, there is a real mixed bag of energy going on here. One of the things I wanted to show you, I'm going to circle back to that Jupiter piece because I really want us to grab that life raft kind of thing if we're feeling like all over the map and being pulled in all directions. So I want to show you on the chart here. So here's the chart for just as the sun is about to move into Cancer. So you can see the sun down here. It's at 29 Gemini in this chart, and it's just about to hit 0 degrees of Cancer. At the same time, the moon has entered Scorpio up here at 4 degrees, and Jupiter has just stationed retrograde at 2 degrees of Pisces. So you can see this blue triangle, right? Between the moon, the sun, and Jupiter. There is a grand trine happening as Jupiter stations retrograde, and the sun is just about to tip into Cancer. So it is like a life raft. The other thing I want you to notice on here is the moon in Scorpio is also squaring Mars in Leo, right? Pretty tightly there. You can see that red line. And then, of course, you can still see the red line from Saturn to Uranus down here. So it's almost like everything is being triggered at once. But Jupiter, is like this, like, hey, it's okay. It's flashing neon sign saying, over here. sort of thing, right? So I want us to kind of like try to remember that. So what I want you to think about here is, in terms of what's happening and what's been happening in your life in general, between specifically Saturn and Uranus, which are occupying 2 houses in your chart, right? Saturn is sitting in the Aquarius, wherever Aquarius sits for you, and Uranus is wherever Taurus sits for you, and we're going to get there. I did cover that in a video before, but I think it is important to revisit this now. Again, like I said, in light of the fact that Mars is going to be triggering that, and the moon to a lesser degree. But so what is the larger story, right? Think about this. What is the larger story for me in relation to this dynamic? Like, what has this been about for me? So where am I craving change in my life, right? That's the Uranus piece. Uranus is the liberator. Uranus wants to disrupt the status quo. Where am I craving change? But it's being stalled, right? There's Saturn over there and Aquarius, kind of tapping the brakes and pulling back on the reins and really forcing us to examine things, and not just be knee-jerk, right? So, and then I want you to think about now, with Mars moving into Leo, what is further triggering that dynamic for you? And then, of course, again, how can I, when I need it, how can I find solace in that Jupiter and Pisces piece right now? It will retrograde back, but right now it's still in Pisces. So I'm just going to give you, a personal example here. What's the larger story for me? Okay, so in terms of these pieces of the puzzle. So for me, I have Saturn and Aquarius in my 6th house of daily grind, of work and toil and labor and servitude, of health, health and illness, of really, the daily, like I said, like the daily grind is very much the 6th house. And then I have Saturn in my 9th house of teaching and learning and, ideology and philosophy and adventure and travel and expansion, expanding your horizons and, among other things. And so what's, quite literally, like I'm been trying to shift things in my business, launch a new website, that it revolves around astrology, which is a very 9th house topic, but and the teaching piece, and there's other things going on there, but I'm kind of like, this is a good example to use. And so I'm trying to kind of expand my horizons there, but it's been a real grind, and there's been a lot of stalls and a lot of delays and a lot of frustration because of the daily grind, because so many reasons, that I won't get into all of them. But, among them being just the fact that, COVID obviously has thrown a wrench into a lot of things, and, having kids home all day, every day, and just, it's been a lot of laborious things that have gone on in my life. So anyway, so there's other pieces I could pull in there, but there's that tension that's going on, right? And now Mars is in Leo, my 12th house of solitude, of needing to retreat, of the subconscious, of the unseen, of our self-sabotage, of loss, and generally like some difficult things in the 12th house. So it's like I'm feeling a real need to retreat. And that's intention, right? With the daily grind and with trying to launch this website and all of that. That's all intention. I also have been very triggered, truth be told. Some things have sort of bubbled up from the surface that I kind of thought were were being managed. It's so that has been, just some like familial stuff and that, and some baggage, right? That's been stirred up. And so that is throwing a wrench into things as well. But I have noticed that Jupiter in Pisces is my sun sign, is in my 7th house. There's a bright spot there, right? There's a bright spot in terms of some close personal, relationships and, marriage, that kind of thing. That's been the soul bomb, the bit of a life raft, if you will, right? And things going on with, for my husband and that sort of thing. So that's how that all works. You see, I'm just giving you, and I'm not trying to give you my whole life story and bore you to death. I just want you to know, like, this is like how this works in real life. So there's something going on for you where you are also feeling this tension. And now Mars is further triggering that, and then the moon, as the moon moves through, like I said, Scorpio, on the 20th, 21st, and then later in July, the 18th, 19th, it may kind of be a little like flashpoint as well of that energy, right? So all that to say, one of the keys to working through this, talks about the, kind of focusing on the bright spot of Jupiter and Pisces. But one of the keys to working through the tension that's going on, particularly between Saturn and Uranus, but again, triggered by Mars and the moon, is to try to kind of have it both ways. To hold two opposing concepts, thoughts, ideas, possibilities, and have them both be true, or see the validity, right? To both Saturn and Uranus, to both the old and the new, to both the structure and the destruction, to both the tradition and the innovation, to both the boundaries and the sense of limitlessness or unboundedness, to the to both the practical and the outlandish. I'm trying to think of other archetypal kind of words I can use. To the rules and the rule breaker. There's so many different words there, but how can those things work? How can they both work, right? Even though they're in tension. So, like taking something of Saturn and something of Uranus and having that, one of the things we didn't talk about, and it's just occurring to me now, actually, having that sort of, be the bridge to healing in some way. So one thing that you may not know is that Saturn, being a planet that sort of like, it's the furthest planet we can see with the naked eye. And then Uranus is out, like Saturn's the boundary and Uranus is beyond the bounds, right? But Chiron, known as, nicknamed the wounded healer, orbits between those two, between Saturn and Uranus. And so there's, that's relevant. There is this idea that there is a potential for bringing those things together somehow. And so that's something to really consider, right? I mean, you may have heard that one of the signs of really high sort of intelligence is being able to hold two opposing concepts or notions and having them both be true, right? That idea of paradox. So before I take you through each of the signs, what I want to do is, I've been reading this book. I've been savoring this book. Okay, so Discovering the Inner Mother. It's by a woman named Bethany Webster. And it's really, it's potent. And truthfully, it deals with the whole notion of the mother wound, right? That we all have, and how that relates to patriarchy. So it gets very personal, but it's also, about the bigger picture as well. And I kind of have to take it in chunks to kind of process. But it was interesting because, as I was mentioning to you, I've been a bit triggered over the last few days, and I go to bed last night and I hadn't read anything from this book for probably about a week or so, and I grabbed the book and I open it up, and lo and behold, there is this there's this chapter on boundaries, right? And so it was very relevant, and it really confirmed and validated some things for me that I already knew but needed to be reminded of. So I just wanted to read you this because I know this may seem like, what does this have to do with anything? But it relates to this idea of both, of having both, of doing both, of two things that may seem like they are in conflict, both being valid or true. Okay, so that's why I wanted to share this with you. So this just little snippet here, it's the subtitle is Healthy Boundaries, Sovereignty of Self. So, and Chiron that I was just talking about, right, that bridges sort of the gap between Saturn and Uranus, is in Aries. You've heard me talk about this before. Chiron in Aries is about healing our sense of self and our identity and our sovereignty and that sort of thing. So having compassion and strong boundaries, right? It's this idea of yes and that you may have heard other people refer to. So as an extension of the cultural ideal of the all-good mother who self-sacrifices and puts the needs of others before her own, many of us grew up with the unconscious belief that we are good women when we tolerate poor treatment by giving others the benefit of the doubt or taking the high road. But the problem is that, too often, we allow our compassion for wounded people to soften boundaries that should be quite firm, unwittingly opening us up to harm. In other words, there's a common belief that if we are to have compassion for people who harm us, it's wrong to hold them accountable for their actions because they didn't intend to do harm. The truth is that you can have both. Okay, that's the important part. You can have both. You can have compassion and strong boundaries. They must go hand in hand. Don't feel guilty for holding people accountable. Our compassion need not disable our instincts to protect ourselves, right? We're moving into Cancer season. Cancer is, to a degree, about protection. Our compassion need not open us up to harm. I guess I'll just read you the example too. I like to use the metaphor of a rabid dog. If a dog that was clearly sick with rabies approached you, you would understand that you need to keep a distance from the animal in order to stay safe. Yet that distance wouldn't stop you from also feeling compassion for the sick animal. You would likely feel both simultaneously, an obvious need to keep your distance and a heartfelt empathy for the dog's condition, which it incurred through no fault of its own. So, I'm gonna continue here. Just this last piece. A clear balance of compassion and containment is something we must feel entitled to in our relationships. Compassion and containment, right? Having strong boundaries and limiting interactions with unconscious people is a form of mothering ourselves. Tolerating toxic behavior can come under the guise of taking the high road or being the bigger person, right? Who among us has not done that? Particularly for those of us who, as children, had to survive by coddling our abusive parents or watching our mothers coddle our fathers or vice versa. Know that as an empowered adult woman, or man, I would say, you don't have to be around people who don't honor you. You don't have to be the dumping ground for someone else's unconscious behavior or the unhealed wounds of others. Sometimes when we set boundaries, people become angry because those boundaries leave them to manage their own emotions instead of you carrying their emotional burden. Don't take responsibility for their pain. It doesn't serve them or you in the end. You are the authority of your own energy, of what you allow or don't allow into your space, and you don't owe people an apology or explanation for doing what's right for you. This is a form of claiming your personal power, a form of self-love. I invite you to contemplate these questions. What are you tolerating in your relationships? Where do you need to have stronger boundaries? How is tolerating this put a drain on your energy? How would setting a firmer boundary free up your energy and vitality, right? And there, at the very end, is that notion of how would setting a firmer boundary, Saturn, free up your energy, right? Your vitality. Free. Uranus is the freedom piece. Saturn is the boundary piece. And so, and there's this idea that we can have both. So it may not be in your personal relationships. It may be, sort of two areas of your life. How can you have, the yes and? How can you have, both things be true? So I invite you to contemplate that. And I just went off on a tangent, and I'm sorry, but but not really. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to take you now through the signs. And what I'm going to focus on here is the Saturn-Uranus piece and the two houses that those are sitting in for you, and those life themes that are in tension, right? And then I'm going to briefly touch on Leo and the moon. So, but overall, what I want to say is that if you are a cardinal sign, which is Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, then, and when I say a cardinal sign, I'm talking like, if you're a rising sign or a sun sign, or even, moon in the cardinal signs, then, and particularly if you've got placements around the sort of 13, 14, 15 degree mark, give or take, even on either side, that's where Saturn and Uranus made this second exact square, right? As I recall correctly. I'm just going to double check that. Yeah, 13 degrees. So that's a real hot spot. So if you've got placements around there, you're no doubt feeling this, right? But If you have significant placements in any of the cardinal, in any of the fixed signs, you're really going to be feeling this personally. And the fixed signs are Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, and Scorpio. But getting back to cardinal placements, the houses, this is what I want to say, that are being triggered for you, for our cardinal friends, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, are the 2nd house, the 5th house, the 8th, and the 11th. So those are the 4 houses that are in this kind of tug of war right now. And then and we're going to get to specifics, so just hang tight. But overall, the mutable signs are feeling this energy, pulling in all directions in houses 3, 6, 9, and 12. And the fixed signs, so the fixed signs are really getting triggered by this energy. Fixed signs are feeling this in the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th houses, which are the angles in the chart. So that is significant. Those are potent spots. So the fixed signs are really getting, lit up by this. And here's the thing, I don't want you to get the impression that this is all bad news and doom and gloom. It's not. There is a potential for huge, and lasting change here, and really significant, potent developments. But it's not easy, right? It's not necessarily going to be easy. It's requiring a lot of gymnastics, if you will, and a lot of, it's requiring in some ways the fixed signs to develop their mutability, their ability to adapt and to really kind of to embrace the change, but while still holding on to that fixed quality of dependability and steadfastness and that kind of thing, if that makes sense to you. Okay, so we are going to take it through each sign. I'm going to try not to prattle on and on, because I think the important thing here is the overall picture that I've given you. But and I did do another video on the Saturn Uranus square that I will also link below. So if you feel like there's pieces missing here, go listen to that, and it will help you as well. But we're going to start, in this case, I'm going to start with Aquarius, because I just thought, okay, well, Saturn, let's start with Saturn, right? And Saturn is in your sign, Aquarius. So we're going to start with Aquarius. And just before I dive in, I am using whole sign houses. And these are general forecasts, right? So I don't know your chart if I haven't seen it, obviously. I am looking at rising sign first and foremost. So if you know your rising sign, listen for that first, but also your sun and moon will give you some added layers, right? And like I said, pay attention to around the 13, 14, degrees, give or take, on either side of the fixed signs. So if you've got anything around there. So, okay, let's dive in with Aquarius, where Aquarius, you have Saturn transiting your 1st house as it's squaring Uranus in your 4th house. So there is this tension going on between you, right? Your 1st house, your self, your self-concept, your personality, your physical body and vitality, how you are how you are perceived by the world, not like in a 10th house, like public recognition way, but it's kind of like, you know, how you kind of come across or how you present yourself out and like your physical kind of appearance and your personality, your character, that kind of thing, right? In general. So it's all about you, right? As an individual. So for you, Aquarius, Saturn's there really requiring some hard labor and some, you know, Saturn likes to kind of to stick with the tradition. Saturn likes to, it doesn't like us to take shortcuts. Saturn is the bit of a taskmaster and really wants us to learn the lessons. It is this concept of, you know, structure and foundation in a sense, boundary. And then there's this square with Uranus and Taurus, and Uranus is over there in your 4th house, shaking things up in terms of your home, your family, your living situation, your roots, your ancestry, you know, your place of living, quite literally, your sense of emotional security potentially as well, you know, parental figures, that sort of thing. So there's some tension going on here. And then, you know, and that's the larger Saturn Uranus picture over the course of 2021. And now Mars is in Leo. So Mars is triggering this square because it's in tension with Saturn and Uranus. So Mars is in your 7th house until the end of July. And that's the piece of the puzzle is about your close personal relationships, right? So that's inflaming things. And there may be a lot of activity going on and action, and maybe, you know, a sense of like trying to assert yourself more in personal relationships, and hopefully not like not aggressiveness, because Mars can bring aggressiveness, right? And you know, like not like warring in personal relationships, but it can make you determined in some way, in that sphere of personal relationships, and how that is, you know, to kind of like resolve the tension that's going on between, on this axis of you and others, right? The self and the significant other people in your life, and your roots, your home, your family, your place of living, like I was saying, those 4th house things. And then when the moon moves through Scorpio a couple of times, right? Like June 20th, 21st, those couple of days, and then July 18th, 19th, it's going to trigger the 4th piece of the puzzle, which is Scorpio in your 10th house, which is your career, your public life, your worldly ambitions, your the legacy you wish to leave, right? Which is opposed to the legacy that you have been left, which was 4th house. So that's where the tension is. This first 7th house axis, you and the other, the relationship axis, and the home, like the private life, public life axis, you know, parenting. It could be like parental things going on as well. So that's it. It's like this, or authority figures, or your sense of authority, you know, as well. And so that's like, you know, being, like I said, you're like being pulled in all directions there. And you know, how can you work through that tension in the ways that we discussed in the introduction? And then again, like holding that kind of, you know, Jupiter and Pisces as the sort of life raft or beacon when you need it. So, and the video, I'm not going to go into the Pisces house in your chart. If you know where Pisces is, awesome. If you don't, you can listen to the Jupiter and Pisces video where I go through that as well. So I'm going to leave that there for you, Aquarius. I'm going to move to Pisces now, because Pisces, so you've got Saturn in your 12th house, squaring off with Uranus in your 3rd house. And then the 6th and the 9th are also being triggered by Mars, and then the moon as well, right? Mars and eventually Venus as well. So for you, Pisces, the Saturn-Uranus story is, Saturn in the 12th, which is, truthfully, like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. It is one of the more kind of trying placements in the chart, the 12th, and Saturn in the 12th. But Saturn kind of, in some ways, has an affinity for the 12th because, there is this sense of toughness in some way, right? So the 12th house deals with things like endings, culminations, loss, like the closing out of a cycle. It has to do with how we sabotage ourselves. So sometimes we have some bad habits and or unconscious behaviors and patterns, those kinds of things, addictions, that sort of thing. There's also an element of things that are kind of hidden or secret or going on behind closed doors. And this can include things like places of retreat, for better or worse. So like literal retreat centers, or things like that, just like that sense of drawing away from the world to recuperate, to recover, to get some solitude. But it can also be on the other side, like isolation, right? That is not necessarily like welcome, but it may be necessary. Convalescence, things like spending time in hospital or a rehabilitation facility or something like that. These are all 12th house things. It's this idea of, it's on the axis of health, and it's like your spiritual mental health, I often see, as related to the 12th house. So that is where Saturn is. And the Uranus piece, where, the disruptor, Uranus wants things to change. Saturn's is making it difficult, and pulling back on the reins. But Uranus is sitting in your 3rd house of your community, your siblings, your cousins, your neighbors, your peers, the people in your environment, and your close environment, your immediate environment, your things like travel, but usually it's like shorter trips, communications, your daily communications with people, even your thoughts, your perceptions, that sort of thing, your self-talk. 3rd house can be commerce and marketing and those sorts of things. So it's a lot of things, a lot of themes, right? But those are the 2 areas. And I'm talking about, like, obviously not every single one of those things is going to pertain to you, but some blend of those house themes is going on for Pisces, particularly, if you're Pisces rising, and those things are in tension. And then you've got Mars moving into your 6th house. So axis of health, 6th house, the daily grind, health, illness, like servitude, hard work, checking off the ticky boxes, sometimes pets. Mars is going in there, triggering some things, right? And like further adding to the tension, but potentially motivating you to act, and assert yourself in some way through those 6th house themes that are part, or triggering the tension, or highlighting the tension. And then you're gonna have the moon moving through there a couple of times as it moves through Scorpio in June 20th, 21st, and July 18th, 19th, which will trigger your ninth house, which is like the other end of that axis of the mind, where it has to do with your worldview, your ideology, foreign people and places, travel, sometimes law, teaching, learning, those sorts of things, right? So that's what's going on. It's the 12th, the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th that are being triggered by this Saturn, Uranus, and then Mars Moon piece. So that's where you're being pulled in all directions. The good news for you, Pisces, is that Jupiter is in your sign, right? And Neptune's there too, but Jupiter is in your sign. We didn't talk so much about the Neptune retrograde, and I'm not going to address it for every sign, but it's like when Neptune retrogrades, it can have the effect of kind of like removing the veil in a sense, so making things a little bit less foggy, so that's potentially a plus. But Jupiter's in your sign, right? And so it's offering you some protection, some support, the lifeboat, really, that I was talking about earlier. So that is what's going on for you, Pisces. I feel like this could get really long. I'm trying for it not to, but best laid plans. And so definitely, Pisces, listen to the intro, right, where we talked about all the things that are pertinent. And if you want to go back to listen to the Jupiter and Pisces video and the Saturn and Uranus video that I'll link below, or Saturn square Uranus video, the first one I did, then you can go back and listen to those as well. All right, I'm going to move on to Aries. Aries, for you, the trigger points are the 11th house where Saturn is, the 2nd house where Uranus is, and then you've got Mars in your 5th house opposite the 11th, and the moon will trigger your 8th house a couple of times opposite the 2nd, right? So you've got these two axes being triggered. So 11th house, 5th house, which is collaborations, friends, groups, allies, 11th house, right? Opposing the 5th house of in your individual creative sort of self-expression, children, fun, joy, what brings you joy in life, potentially romance, that sort of thing. And then also the financial axis is being triggered for you. So your personal resources versus the resources of others, among other things. Your and when I see resources, like oftentimes that's, like I said, it's the financial axis, but we can also think of resources as our personal, like, resources, like our time and our energy versus other people's time and energy as well, right? So, but the Saturn-Uranus piece, the two biggies there are the 11th house of, like I said, collaborations in the group and friendships, and then the 2nd house of your personal finances and personal resources. And so there's some tension going on here. It could be like, somehow Saturn is really making, group dynamics difficult potentially, or really putting some boundaries up there, throwing some obstacles in the way, making things, a little bit like difficult, and maybe wanting you to kind of hang on to the past even a little bit there. And then Uranus and Taurus is your personal resources, wanting you to shake things up, right? And there needs to be some kind of a change. You're craving change, perhaps, when it comes to your personal resources. Like maybe you want to make more money or something like that, or you want to not have to use so much of your personal energy and time to get your basic needs met. And you want to break free, or you want to look at making money in a different way or something like that. And then there's this tension happening from like the group on some level, whether that be, allies or friends or organizations or networks, could be having to do with online stuff as well. That's going on. and your kind of hopes and dreams for the future, right, is 11th house. And then further to that, you've got Leo in the 5th house, which is where Mars will be transiting. So, that's a trigger point of your, your individual sort of self-expression and like I said, children and joy and, what's bringing you pleasure and these sorts of things. And so there is this tension. It's like being pulled in all these directions of the 11th, the 2nd, the 5th, and the 8th. And how can you resolve that tension, right? We talked about in the introduction that concept of like, how can both things be true, sort of thing. And Mars moving through Leo in your 5th may be the piece, like the drive that you need to kind of work the tension out ultimately, right? So, and then Jupiter in Pisces being the proverbial life raft that I talked about in the introduction. So I'm going to leave that for you, Aries. I'm going to move to Taurus now, where Taurus, you have this tension playing out on the 10th, 4th house axis. So Saturn's in the 10th house. And then the 1st, 7th axis. Uranus is in the 1st house, right? So this is you're a fixed sign, Taurus, so you're feeling this, right? This is on the angles of your chart, like I mentioned earlier in the intro, where that's potent stuff going on there. So these are significant placements. And so particularly if you've got, a lot going on in those fixed signs. So for you, Saturn's in your 10th house, really making you work hard at your career, at your public kind of life, at the legacy you wish to leave, at your, maybe relationship with authority figures or your own authority. And sitting, throwing the wrench in things sometimes, requiring you to really do a lot of work there and put in a lot of toil potentially, and setting some boundaries and really requiring you to do some hard work. Holding the reins kind of thing, pulling back on the reins. So that's the Saturn piece. And then you've got Uranus over there in your 1st house of self, of your you as an individual, of your physical body and vitality and your character, your personality, how people perceive of you, kind of thing, how you present yourself in the world. Pardon me. And so there's this tension going on there between your public life and yourself, in a sense, to put it simply, right? And it's like you may want changes on a personal level. Like you may want to change your sense of self. You may want there's a real disruption going on there with Uranus, right? But it's being there's a lot of pressure from Saturn to kind of take it slow and steady, and things are not happening as quickly as you might like them to, and so that's what's going on there. And then you've got Mars moving through your 4th house of your home, your family, your roots, your place of living, and maybe like there's some parental stuff potentially, and that Mars and Leo is further triggering that Saturn-Uranus dynamic. And Mars is like the principle of assertion and then drive, right? And potentially aggression. But so it could be like the catalyst in some ways to help you work through the tension, and hopefully not, in a negative way, doesn't sort of further inflame the situation. And then, of course, you're going to have the moon moving through your 7th house of personal relationships and contracts and agreements a couple of times, right? In June, once in June, around the 20th, 21st, and once in July around the 18th, 19th, while we still have Mars and Leo. And so it's like really kind of highlighting that cardinal cross, that those angles in your chart. So, and then I mentioned in the intro, like, look to Jupiter and Pisces as a bit of a life raft when things are really kooky and tense potentially. But there is this opportunity for some really potent change. It's just not necessarily easygoing. So I'm going to leave that there for you, Taurus. I'm going to move to Gemini now, where we've got the 9th house where Saturn sits for you, and the 12th house where Uranus is currently, right? Uranus and Taurus, and the 9th house is Saturn and Aquarius. Those two areas of the chart are doing this dance all year where they are in tension with each other. And that's the overarching story. 9th house of your sense of potential for, like expanding your horizons, for teaching and learning, and for, your philosophy and ideology, for foreign people, foreign travel, even, foreign cultures, in your relationship to that. And then, that's Saturn's making that difficult right now, and I'm really tapping the brakes and pulling back on the reins. And there's a lot of, obstacles potentially, and just this sense of like, oh my gosh, can we just get on with it? Like, it's restricting things. And then Uranus in the 12th house is asking for some breakthroughs that may be like wants to liberate you in some way. Or you want change, you're desperately craving change, but it may be very much under the surface, and you may not even be consciously aware of it, in the 12th house. Or there may be changes going on to things as a result of loss and endings. There may be secrets, there may be, things going on behind closed doors that are quite disruptive. There is a sense of something trying to kind of break to surface almost, right? And it may happen quite suddenly or chaotically, even with Uranus. And so this can be even doing like solitude differently, like retreat differently, with Uranus there, like a different way of doing your alone time, even, that you could be craving, with Uranus in the 12th house. There is on a practical level, like when we talk about the 12th house, we can talk about things like literal institutions and things that are kind of places of what we would say places of confinement, right? So hospitals, retreat centers, rehab facilities, things like that, prisons, detention facilities, that sort of thing, may play a role for some people. And so the 9th, 12th houses are what's in tension. And then you've got Mars moving through your 3rd house, triggering things further. Triggering this dynamic. 3rd house, your neighborhood, your community, the people in your close range, your siblings, your cousins, your teammates, your peers, close friends that feel like siblings even. So Mars is moving through there, maybe inflaming things in that area, but maybe allowing you a greater sense of like assertiveness, hopefully not aggression. But it's further triggering that dynamic of the 9th, 12th house. And then as the moon moves through Scorpio a couple of times, it'll trigger the other piece of that puzzle. Which is your 6th house of health and servitude and that kind of thing. So for you, Gemini, 9th, 12th, 3rd, and 6th houses are how you are being pulled in all directions over this time, right? So think about, how can we resolve this tension? How can you resolve this tension for yourself? By considering that maybe, two things can be simultaneously true or possible. And then there's that Jupiter and Pisces piece that's a bit of a life raft that I spoke about earlier, right? And I'll link below to that video and the other Saturn Uranus video that I did, if you haven't seen it yet. So, okay, Gemini, I'm going to leave that there for you. I'm always forever long-winded these days. I'm going to move on to Cancer now, where you have the houses that are being triggered for you are the 8th house. Saturn's in your 8th house of Aquarius. Uranus is in your 11th house of Taurus, and then you've got Mars in your 2nd house till the end of July, so triggering that piece of the puzzle. And then the moon will dip into the 5th house a couple of times and like kind of light up that square, right? That cross, all four corners kind of thing. So it's this feeling of being like stretched in all directions. And so for you, Cancer, the main story here between Saturn and Uranus over 2021, it has to do with your entanglement with other people, which is the 8th house, other people's resources, right? Whether that be that can be resources from your partner, like your partner's income, but it can also be things like taxes and debt and insurance and loans and bursaries and wills and inheritance and that sort of thing. And like there's this notion of like what's buried in the depths, right? Like your psychological kind of wounding and that sort of thing. And this notion of transformation that we often, it's more of a modern day association with the 8th house. But that concept of death and rebirth, the death and rebirth cycle. So that's where Saturn is. It's making things difficult, right? There's some difficulties, some restrictions, some obstacles that Saturn is throwing in your path. Like maybe it's your partner's money. Maybe something happened, like, your partner's not working, so that money's not coming in. Maybe it's some kind of like you got hit with a big tax bill. Maybe, there's a lot of debt that is making things difficult. Maybe there's some issues going on with an inheritance. Maybe there's some intimacy issues going on. Like there's various things it can be. But Saturn's making that, making you work for it, like really throwing some obstacles up there in the 8th house. And then Uranus, you're craving change. You're craving, Uranus is wanting to disrupt things, disrupt the status quo when it comes to your 11th house of the group, of your collaborators, of your allies, of your hopes and dreams for the future. And, but there's this tension between that and the Saturn piece. And then further to that, Mars moving through your 2nd house of your personal resources, right? Opposite the 8th house. So Mars is triggering that financial axis, and that's your, the money you make. That's your time and energy that you put out to get your basic needs met, your sense of worth and value and that sort of thing. And so Mars is inflaming that area for better or worse, right? And so like on a positive note, Mars could give you the drive, the will to take action there in some way that has to do with your personal resources. That may ultimately help resolve the tension between Saturn and Uranus, some kind of action that you take there. But hopefully it's not like further inflaming the situation, right? And then you've got the moon moving through your 5th house, which will kind of like, there'll be a couple of flashpoints, June 20th, 21st, and then July 18th, 19th, where the moon is triggering that 4th point, which is Scorpio in your 5th, which is your what sparks joy for you, how you have fun, your children, your individual sort of creative self-expression, that sort of thing. And so that's the dynamic for you, Cancer. And ultimately it's like, how can we work through this tension? How can we hold two opposing thoughts, and have them both be true and both be possible? How can we, like I talked about in the intro, and then also, the Jupiter and Pisces, the life raft piece that we talked about in the intro as well. So, all right, that's good to go, Cancer. And I'm going to move on to Leo now, where Leo, you have this all going on again on the angles of your chart, because you are a fixed sign. And so this is potent, right? Significant. So you have Saturn in your 7th house, transiting your 7th house of one-to-one relationships, contracts, and agreements. And you have Uranus disrupting, the 10th house and wanting change there, craving change and liberation in your 10th house of public life, career, legacy, like the legacy you wish to leave, authority, your relationship to authority. My stomach just started growling so loud, so hopefully you can't hear that. But anyway, so there is this tension going on. That's the Saturn-Uranus story for you over 2021, between the 7th and the 10th, right? Relationships and career, like contracts and agreements and career, or public life, that sort of thing. And then Mars has moved into your sign, your 1st house of self, of your physical vitality and energy, your appearance, your character, your personality, your like how how you kind of project yourself out, how you appear to the how you present yourself, kind of thing. And it's you, but it's you. That's the 1st house, as opposed to the other, which is 7th house across the sky, which is intention here. And then the moon will further sort of trigger, be like a flashpoint moving through your 4th house of home, family, roots, ancestry, emotional security, parenting, and that's, that'll happen for a couple days in June 20th, 21st, and a couple days in July, the 18th, 19th. But it's kind of just kind of like, one more kind of spark there, and really making you feel potentially pulled in all directions, right? 7th, 10th, 1st, and 4th. And trying to like, how do we work through this tension, right? And so the whole idea is to as I was talking about in the introduction, like, it's like, can we hold this idea of yes, and of like two things both being possible, or true, of blending these energies of the old and the new in some way, the Saturn-Uranus piece, right? And then Mars triggering your 1st house of self, which actually may give you, like, ideally that Mars transit is going to give you the drive and the, to take the action, to kind of resolve that tension and work through that tension. So, and not, not inflame things further. Like with Mars moving through your 1st house, Leo, just be mindful of, how you're physically moving through the world, and that you're not doing some crazy, like, high risk sporting activities or something like that with Mars moving through there. There could be, like, sometimes there can be some kind of like a physical, like a surgery or something like that may be required or happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, and it doesn't have to be like a big deal, and it could be something you choose to do. So I think that's good to go on, Leo. We said a lot in the intro, so please listen to that. And then if you want to go and listen to the other Saturn Uranus video that I did, I'll link to that below. And then, holding Jupiter as this kind of, Jupiter in Pisces as this like I said, like the quenching or the bit of a life raft when things may be just kind of going crazy for you. Holding on to that in some way, as a beacon, so yeah, I'll leave that there for you, Leo. I'm going to move to Virgo now, where Virgo, you have the 4 areas of your chart that are being lit up by these fixed energies are the 6th house, the 9th, the 12th, and the 3rd, right? The big story is Saturn in the 6th house, which is where Aquarius sits for you. Uranus in Taurus in the 9th house, and then also the 12th house and the 3rd. Now, I used myself as a personal example in the intro of this video to kind of give you a real world, how does this potentially play out, right? Because I am a Virgo rising, so this is my experience. This is what I'm going through right now as a Virgo rising. And so there's this tension happening between the work that you have to do on the day-to-day, right? The sense of like toil and daily grind, and labor and checking off the ticky boxes, that sense of like servitude almost. And then, and health and wellness. And then, and it could be pets too, for some people. And then Uranus is craving or change in your 9th house of like your ideology, of expanding your horizons, of teaching and learning, of travel and anything that's sort of like expanding your horizons on some level. And so Uranus is like, there's a real craving for things to be different there. But then Saturn's over there in the 6th house, making you work for it, right? And putting obstacles in the way and boundaries and making things feel really kind of like sometimes drudgery. The daily grind can feel like real drudgery with Saturn in the 6th. But hold on to this notion where, how can the hard work on the day-to-day allow for the change in the long run that you're craving, and allow for you to expand your horizons, or some project, or some like higher degree program that you're doing, or like some hope of, foreign travel, anything that has to do with that, or some like maybe something that you're wanting to publish even, or something that has to do with one thing I never talked about. 9th house can speak to like religious institutions, and like religion as a philosophy more so than a religious institution, really. That kind of idea. So for some people that could be a factor. So then Mars is moving through your 12th house of retreating and solitude, and your maybe bad habits that self-sabotage you, your sense of like what's going on in the unconscious, potentially what's going on behind closed doors, things that are like endings, losses, there could be an element of some kind of like confinement or isolation, going on there, or something having to do with like some kind of an institution, like a hospital or a long-term care facility, or a prison or a rehab facility or something like that as well could potentially, right? Not that won't be for everybody, but for some folks. And then the moon will move through your third house, Scorpio, a couple of times, and it will trigger the house of immediate environment, of siblings and peers and, friends who feel like family, and communications, and moving parts, and even like things like commerce and marketing, and that can fit into the third house. So I know that's a lot, but basically the Saturn Uranus piece is the main story, right? 6th and 9th house. But then there's this, like, Mars is triggering the 12th, and Mars may give you the will to resolve that tension between the 6th and the 9th house, right? The Saturn Uranus tension. And so it's like Mars can allow you, Mars in your 12th house, is be like actively retreating, so that tension, you can work through that tension, or that tension can be resolved, as one example, right? So, and then of course, Jupiter in Pisces is, it's the life raft, right? That you can hang on to if things are getting really crazy. So I'll link to the Jupiter Pisces video and the other Saturn Uranus video that I did before in the comments below, and you can check those out if you haven't yet, and if you think that would be helpful. Okay, we're going to move on to Libra now. So Libra, for you, the tension's playing out in your 5th and your 8th houses. So 5th house is where Saturn in Aquarius is sitting for you, and 8th house is where Uranus in Taurus is. And then, so that's the major tension, the major story of 2021, the backdrop. And then over the next little while, till the end of July, you've got Mars and Leo triggering your 11th house. And the moon will trigger your 2nd house a couple of times. But let's break that down and focus on the Saturn-Uranus piece. Saturn is in your 5th house. Saturn is putting a damper on the fun. Let's just put it that way. Or has been, right? Saturn is maybe bringing about or making you feel restricted, throwing some obstacles in your way in relation to what brings you joy, how you have fun in life, things around children, and your individual sort of self-expression even. So Saturn's there being a bit of a taskmaster, wanting you to learn some tough lessons there, and throwing some obstacles, right? Pulling back on the reins on the party that the 5th house can sometimes be. And then Uranus is sitting in your 8th house of other people's resources. So it could be your partner's income, but it can be things like insurance, taxes, debt, mortgage, wills, inheritance, bursaries, loans, that sort of thing. Wanting to liberate you in some way, just to disrupt the status quo, change, you're craving change in relation to that in some way, shape, or form. But Saturn's being a bit of a stick in the mud about it. And the idea is how we talked about in the intro, how can both things be possible or true? How can we resolve this tension? By blending Saturn qualities and Uranus qualities that we talked about in the intro. And then you've got Mars moving through your 11th house until the end of July now. Mars in Leo, triggering further this tension. But ideally, potentially giving you the drive, Mars, to resolve the tension, to take action, Mars, somehow to resolve this tension. And that can be action through collaborations, which is the 11th house, through your allies, through friendship groups, through your hopes and dreams for the future, right? But allies and friendships and networks, and it can even be online things in the 11th house these days. But so that's where Mars is, it's either further inflaming that tension between the 5th and the 8th, but ideally it could be giving you the impetus to act and to resolve the tension. And then Scorpio will zip through, or the moon will zip through Scorpio a couple of times and kind of ping off that 4th point on the axis there, And it may just be like a flashpoint for a couple of days in June and a couple of days in July that we talked about in the intro. And that has to do with your personal resources, your money, your time, your energy, right? To put it simply. So that is what's transpiring for you, Libra. And then, of course, again, like I'll just mention that Jupiter in Pisces is the life raft, right? That can help us stay afloat during these turbulent times. And I'll link to the Jupiter in Pisces video below. And also to the other Saturn Uranus video that I had recorded a while back when we had the first exact square. Okay, so Libra, I'm going to leave that for you. I'm going to move to Scorpio now, where Scorpio, the tension for you is on that fixed axis because you are a fixed sign. So it's on, not the fixed axis, it's on the angles of your chart is what I meant to say, because you are a fixed sign. So, it's on this, it's in these potent areas, which are the 4th and the 7th and the 10th and the 1st houses for you. And so Scorpio, you've got Saturn in your 4th house and then Uranus in your 7th house, right? These are the two big players over the course of 2021 and moving, in this conversation of tension that's coming to a boiling point, several times, including now, which is further being inflamed or triggered by Leo moving through your 10th house. And to a lesser degree, the moon moving through your 1st house a couple of times between now and the end of July, as Leo is in there, in the 10th house. So basically, let's break this down, Scorpio. There is some hard work that you are having to do in relation to your home, your place of living, your family, your roots, potentially, the idea of parenting, your parental figures, your sense of emotional security and safety even. That's where Saturn is, at that root of your chart, and really causing some delays, some obstruction, making you work really hard there, asking you to really, really get the foundation solid. And then you've got Uranus in your 7th house, disrupting your one-to-one relationships, wanting change, wanting liberation in some way, wanting to disrupt the status quo there, to shake things up in terms of your close personal one-to-one contacts. That can be, your marriage partner, but it can also be like business partners. It can be sort of any one-to-one, close personal relationship. It can have to do with contracts and agreements as well in your 7th house. So there is some tension here, right? And it's reaching, at this point in the year, it's reaching a fever pitch. And then Mars moving through Leo, your 10th house, is further inflaming that. It's this, and which is your career house, the legacy you wish to leave, your relationship to authority and authority figures, and your own authority, your public life, right? And so Mars is there firing things up. Ideally, though, that could be helpful in helping you resolve the tension between the 4th, 7th, because it's allowing you to take action. It may require a lot of action or activity that's going on there. It's some initiative, some assertiveness, right? So when used appropriately, and Mars is, not debilitated in Leo, so that's good. It can be helpful. It can be helpful to resolve the tension. And like the whole idea here is like, how can these things both kind of be true? How can we blend the old and the new, right? The Saturn and the Uranus. How can we have tried and true and innovation sort of thing? And then the moon will zip through your sign a couple of times on June 20th, 21st, and July 18th, 19th. And that may be a bit of a flashpoint too, it will trigger the fourth point on that cross, right? So, and then I'll say to you, as I've said to all the other signs, I'll remind you of the Jupiter in Pisces piece, where Jupiter in Pisces could be this potential life raft, right? That I spoke about. So I'll link to the Jupiter in Pisces video I did a while back below if you haven't seen it yet. And the other Saturn Uranus video I did earlier in the year. So that could be helpful to you. All right, so we're going to move on to Sagittarius now. Just have to take one more sip of water. Sag, for you, the trigger points are the 3rd house where you've got Saturn in Aquarius, the 6th house where you have Uranus and Taurus, and then Mars is moving through your 9th house, Leo, until the end of July, and then the moon will zip through your 12th house and just be a bit of a flashpoint for like a couple of days in June and July, right? But that's a much shorter term thing. But highlighting that kind of, that being pulled in all directions kind of factor that we talked about a lot in the introduction. And so the big story here, though, is Saturn-Uranus, right? Saturn in your 3rd house of your immediate environment, of schooling, potentially, like teaching, learning, but usually at an earlier, like elementary, high school level, or learning the basics, right? The people in your immediate environment, so this can be like your siblings, your cousins, your neighbors, your peers, your friends who feel like family, or who feel like siblings, kind of thing. Your sense of, this can be moving parts. This can have to do with technology or vehicles even. It can have to do with commerce and marketing. Your communications as well, your daily communications, right? So that's Saturn making you do some hard work and throwing some obstacles in the way, and requiring, kind of like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, this kind of energy, right? And throwing some boundaries up. And then Uranus over there in your 6th house is like wanting to break the routine, literally, because the 6th house is your daily grind, the daily routine, the toil, the work you do on the day to day, your sense of like, servitude, maybe pets as well. I like to throw that in there for people that it's relevant to. So, and it's trying to, it's trying to like shake things up in that area. Your health as well is 6th house. Very much so. I don't know how I could forget that. But so those 2 areas of your chart are in tension on and off. Like that's the backdrop for 2021, as we've talked about many times before. And the story's reaching, sort of this climax point around now, and it's being further inflamed or triggered by Mars moving through your 9th house of your philosophy, your ideology, your the way you see the world, your sense of wanting to expand your horizons, right? Your sense of growth, your sense of maybe even like travel to foreign places, or foreign people, your connection with foreign people in some way. So, this is Mars moving through there is inflaming this, but ideally, what I've said to the other signs is ideally like giving you the impetus to act, the will, to act in some way, to take some kind of action, or to assert yourself in that 9th house arena that resolves the kind of tension, or allows you to work through the tension, the Saturn-Uranus tension, right? But it can feel like everything's like just flaring up. And as the moon moves through Scorpio, over the course of like June 20th, 21st, and then again July 18th, 19th, it's going to move through your 12th house, and it'll hit that 4th point and kind of light up that cross. And it could be a trigger point, which could be, again, for better or worse kind of thing. But having the awareness and the consciousness about what's going on can be very, very helpful. And then you've got the Jupiter in Pisces, like I keep referring to it as sort of a life raft or a ground wire or something like that, that you can hold in your awareness, that you can look to kind of quell the fire a little bit. And I will link, rather than going into what house that is, this video's long enough. I'll link to the Jupiter and Pisces video below if you need a refresher. And I'll also put the other Saturn Uranus video that I did earlier in the year if you want to listen to that as well. So, the idea, I'll just say, Sag, before I sign off for you, is that we're looking to, like, how can we blend this Saturn Uranus energy to our, for the best possible outcome? How can both things be possible or true? How can we blend the boundaries and the traditions and the old of Saturn and the innovation and the liberation of and the new of Uranus, right? So and that, Mars, I see potentially Mars and Leo as being helpful, although it may feel a bit inflammatory as well, potentially. It just kind of all depends. So, all right, I'm going to leave that there, Sagittarius. Move on to, last but not least in this case, we've got Capricorn. And Capricorn, for you, the trigger points are the second house where Saturn is moving through Aquarius, the fifth house where Uranus is moving through Taurus, and then through to the end of July, we've got Mars and Leo in your 8th house. And then the moon will zip through Scorpio of your 11th house, just for a couple days in June and July. So that's less of a thing, really, of an issue, but it will kind of be a bit of a flashpoint in the whole story. But right now, the Saturn-Uranus dynamic is at a high point and or a pressure point, right? It's the backdrop of 2021, as we've spoken about many times before, but it is being really triggered as they are in an exact square. So we've got Saturn in your second house, which is your personal finances, your personal resources. So it could be your money, your material possessions, the money you make, but it's also it could be your time and your energy as well, your sense of worth or self-worth or, values. But it's generally the second house is thought of very much as your personal resources, and in modern times, that's the money we make to get our basic needs met, to put it really, simply. And then, so you've got that going on, and Saturn's causing some problems there. Throwing some obstacles in the way, putting some delays in your path, restrictions, that sort of thing, right? So maybe for whatever reason, well, maybe because of COVID, maybe who knows, you haven't been making your normal income, or there's been restrictions there going on to your resources, your personal resources. And then Uranus in your 5th house of pleasure, of, how you have fun in life, of children, of things you create, your individual, self-expression, hobbies, that sort of thing, is wanting to liberate you, is wanting to shake things up, in that department, and wanting, a change of how you do that 5th house area. But then your Saturn in your second is, putting a damper on things. So maybe quite literally, it's you want to be able to spend some money on a hobby, or just on plain old, having good old fashioned fun, or something involving children in some way. And the second house is kind of, pulling back the reins. Your Saturn in your second house of your finances is kind of and not so fast. You gotta, and so there's some tension there. And Mars is moving through your 8th house till the end of July, further triggering that. And your 8th house is other people's resources. It could be your partner's income. It could be, income that comes from clients, but it could be things like insurance, taxes, debt, wills, inheritance, bursaries, loans, mortgages, those kinds of things. It's also, it's like your entanglement with other people, you know, intimacy, and psychological kind of depth, right? Psychological wounding, healing. So Mars moving through there is further triggering this dynamic in the fixed signs, particularly between Saturn and Uranus, but it has the potential to be the action that resolves the tension. And it's like there may be a lot of activity going on in that 8th house. It may be like there may be the drive and the will and the assertion, right? In that area that either inflames the tension or helps resolve it. So, you know, ideally, like there's not like a lot of like, it's not bringing aggression to that area, but assertiveness and drive and action, right? So then again, Scorpio is your 11th house, where the moon will move through June 20th, 21st, and July 18th, 19th, and it will light up the 4th point of that cross, and it'll ping that, and it will kind of like be this like zap of like, really, it may be like a real point where it's like feeling pulled in all directions, or a flash point of like really highlighting whatever this is for you, right? And being maybe in a bit of an emotional point, it being the moon in Scorpio. So look to how you can resolve this tension, you know, by blending the old and the new, Saturn and Uranus, by the tradition and the innovation, by the restriction and the liberation, right? Like we talked about all of this in the intro, so I don't want to rehash everything here. Listen to the intro for sure. You can also listen to the Saturn-Uranus video that I did earlier in the year when we had Saturn-Uranus in their first square, and look to, again, I'll remind you, Jupiter in Pisces as the beacon, as the bit of a lifeboat, life raft, you know, to hang on to in turbulent times. And so I will link to the Jupiter in Pisces video I did that you can, there may be actually more than one that you can listen to as well if you haven't yet. So that's a lot to say. Going on 2 hours here. Holy smokes. So I thank you so much, Capricorn, and I thank you everybody for hanging out with me here and allowing me to give you my take on this. Go to astrologymaven.com to get on my email list and hear when the new site launches. And hang in there, right? Deep breaths, hang on to that life raft. I will talk to you next week when we talk about the full moon in Capricorn. Bye for now.